Alright, this month's CE is going to be over NFPA 1404. It's the standard for fire service respiratory protection and training that we use here in HFD. NFPA 1404, it simply mandates that firefighters be out of the hazard area before their low air alarm activates. Alright, this slide illustrates that on a quarter of a tank left, a red light will flash rapidly. Pretty soon HFD is going to mandate that we are having our red light flash at 33% on all the tanks left. Alright, as you see here, you're going to be asked a question. And the question is, are you, as a member of HFD, following the air management policy as spelled out in NFPA 1404? If not, you or your department are not following NFPA standards. And you could be held at fault in a court of law if you or another firefighter was injured or killed because of failure to follow the current NFPA standards. Alright, case in point, I have a couple of examples here. The first one, an East Coast Fire Department did not follow NFPA 1403 live fire training evolutions. They were conducting a live fire training on an abandoned house, and a female firefighter was lost during this so-called controlled burn, and the department was eventually found liable. The next example was pulled from fire engineering textbook. It's air management for the fire service. It states that even if your department is not mandated by NFPA standards, no judicial system has ever ruled against NFPA standards in a liable lawsuit. So now you're thinking, so what? That's not on me. That's on the administration. How would that affect me? Well, what should you know? NFPA underwent a revision back in 2006. The most important changes have to do with the addition of an individual air management program. That's where it starts affecting you. As per NFPA 1404, the authority having jurisdiction shall establish and enforce written SOPs for training in the use of respiratory equipment, which includes all members shall know their individual limits on air consumption during high cardio output situations and other variable factors. This is the air management system. There are a couple of factors involved here, and let's look at them. Uncontrolled factors would be things such as weather, your task assigned while you're inside the IDLH, and the environment. Another control factor will be emotional stress. However, this is a paradox. It's the fight or flight mechanism that comes up when you're in trouble. This can be considered controlled or uncontrolled. That's up to you. Alright, additional mandates from NFPA 1404. Obviously, there is a lot of text inside NFPA 1404, but we're going to hit some highlights. First off, it does say that you must exit the IDLH atmosphere before consumption of the reserve air supply begins. Number 2, the low air alarm, or what we call vibe alert, is your notification that the individual is consuming the reserved air supply. Number 3, activation of the low air alarm warning alarm is an immediate action item for the individual and the team, which means at that point it is time to get out. Number 4, the revised 1404 standard mandates that firefighters must be out of the fire, the IDLH, before their low air warning activates. Number 5, the fact is that the emergency air reserve was never meant to be used for firefighting. Number 6, unfortunately, through poor information, bad habits, and lack of proper training, the American Fire Service, not just HFD, has begun to use this emergency air for firefighting. Think of it like this. Firefighters can and should give 2/3 of the air in their SCBA cylinder to the citizens they are sworn to protect. However, the remaining 1/3 cylinder of air is their air, should something bad happen to them while they are inside the IDLH. Alright, on this side, look at it like this. Let's bring it closer to home. It says first, 2/3 of the bottle is for firefighting and belongs to the citizens, the folks that call 911 for you to show up on their emergency. The last third of your bottle belongs to your kids, your wife, your husband, your parents, and you. SCUBA versus SCBA. Alright, our two industries have quite a bit in common. The scuba diving industry has mandated an emergency air reserve for many decades. And so should we, just as 1404 dictates. Obviously, there's one letter that differentiates scuba divers diving underwater and firefighters in an IDLH environment. We dive in smoke and other IDLHs instead of water. However, if either of us run out of air, the chances for serious injury or death is extremely high. Alright, so could we consider ourselves smoke divers? The answer is yes. The advantage that scuba diving has over the fire department, however, is that 99.9% of the time when you're underwater, you know which way to go for fresh air. That can't always be so inside of IDLH with zero visibility. Alright, so we've seen a couple ways that 1404 has some mandates that we need to focus on. But let's look at 5 ways firefighters are dying inside of structures. And once again, this is how we're dying inside of structures. 1 is smoke, 2 is thermal trauma, 3 is structural collapse, 4 is getting lost, and 5 is the one we're going to focus on here, running out of air. Now, good thing no one has come up with a new way to die inside of a fire. But air management can dramatically make a positive impact on overcoming situations that typically kill us. Several reasons firefighters are dying more in fires, even though the stats show that there are less fires being fought and less fires actually happening. The top 3 reasons are lack of experience and training, poor leadership at the strategic, tactical, and task levels, and number 3, a lack of air management training. Alright, those of us that have been in for a little while, or maybe in when 9/11 occurred. So if you think back, since 9/11, our training in HFD has mainly been focused on incident management systems, weapons of mass destruction, HAZMAT, and terroristic events. Less emphasis has been placed on basic firefighting techniques. Training should be based on the 75-25 rule. And it goes like this: 75% of your training should be on prevention of firefighting mishaps, how not to get hurt, how not to get in trouble. 25% of the training is if we do get trapped or we get in trouble, it's how to fix the mishaps when they happen. A basic firefighting technique that we could practice on, or a solution to the air management problem, is the use of ROAM, the rule of air management. The practice of waiting until the low air alarm activates to exit the hazardous environment, it's got to stop. This practice is not working. By you waiting to leave the hazardous environment until your low air alarm activates, firefighters are betting their lives that nothing will go wrong on their way out of the structure. Many firefighters have lost on this all-in bet. Alright, so we ask ourselves, how can we solve this potentially deadly problem? Well, what we can do is advocate a simple solution. The rule of air management, or ROAM, simply states, know how much air you have in your SCBA and manage that air so that you can leave the hazardous environment before your low air alarm activates. Or to put it another way, know what you have in your bottle and on your gauges and on your heads-up display and get out before your low air alarm activates. Alright, so the question needs to be asked, why do we get out before the low air alarm activates? Historically, we've all been guilty of staying in until our vibe activates, and that's when we come out of the fire. Well, why get out? Well, first off, it gives firefighters an emergency reserve of air in case something goes wrong on the way out. You may only be in a small apartment or a residential home, but if conditions go to zero visibility, it's a total game changer. And always consider Murphy's Law. So the second reason on getting out when your low air alarm activates means following ROAM removes the noise of the low air alarm from the fire ground, thus making the low air alarm regain its original purpose. It's indicating there's an emergency situation. Firefighters have continually and routinely worked into their emergency reserve, working in the IDLH as their low air alarm sounds. Alright, these low air alarms or vibe alerts have become nothing more than a nuisance on the fire ground. They end up being background noise, which is obviously ignored. But what happens when a firefighter's low air alarm is sounding and they are truly in trouble? The answer is because of the false alarm mentality. Just like our past device sounding, the firefighter in trouble will most likely be ignored early on in a critical or mayday scenario. A new basic firefighting skill out there is the ROAM technique. It's a skill that should be taught to all firefighters. The cost of implementing and using the ROAM system? Absolutely nothing. There is no equipment to buy, no upgrade to purchase. ROAM is simply a change in behavior, nothing more. Using ROAM is a change, and obviously a lot of us are apt to not like change inside the fire service. But remember this, air management is already being used in the fire service today, It's even been in effect by specialized teams within HFD for many years. HAZMAT, confined space teams, they have to manage their air accordingly due to long time framed events. They have to wear it continually through decon and out into the warm zone. When was the last time you heard about a HAZMAT or special ops member being injured or dying from running out of air? Well, the answer is they're not. Not a single technician on a specialty team in the United States has died during an incident in the past 30 years. Well, the reason is they've learned to slow down, take their time, and follow best practices. One of the best practices is the implementation and use of air management. Alright, so how to put ROAM into practice. You can start it today or your next shift on. Simply know your air supply before you go in. Each member should check their air supply at regular intervals and let your officer know your readings. Check your air every 5 minutes or at what they call natural breaks, such as leaving a room from one to another, changing floors, going up from second to third, or finishing a task such as pulling ceiling. Check your gauge. You have a remote gauge and a heads-up display. Obviously, it's easier to state 3/4, half, etc. from your HUD than give your remote gauge in PSI. Officers or team leaders must take the lead in using ROAM. Redistribute the workload within the team. It's called drafting or bumping up. Practice ROAM obviously increases situational awareness. So let's look at a couple of reasons why not practicing ROAM in some situations that might arise. Let's look at what's called the point of no return. First off, what the point of no return is not. It's not the point at which you give up. It's not the point at which you lose hope. And it's obviously not the point at which you just lean over and die. What is it? Well, for us as firefighters, it's the point at which you stop being part of the solution and start becoming part of the problem. Alright, so let's look at some factors that affect the point of no return. Have the appropriate equipment. Starts at shift change. Be prepared emotionally, physically, and mentally. This all started when you decided to become a member of the Houston Fire Department. Know your air supply upon entry into an IDLH. Continually evaluate your air supply and your team's status. Situational awareness. Know the physical layout of the structure and any variables as you proceed through it. What draws you or your team closer to the point of no return? Well, obviously staying in an IDLH until your low air alarm activates. That's one way. Having tunnel vision. Ego is a huge part. Lack of RIT training. Ineffective basic firefighting techniques. Poor command structure. And lack of training in air management techniques. Using ROAM, or the rule of air management, one of those basic firefighting techniques we can start practicing today. There's a couple other things that we can do to be ready to go at any given time. Ready checks, another mnemonic, I know, but let's go over it. Ready. Is your radio ready? Are you on the right channel? Your equipment. Do you have the right equipment to go inside the IDLH and perform your job? Your air. Check your air before you go in. Your duties. Have you checked with your captain or captains? Have you lined out your team before you make entry? If you can say yes to the first 4, then you're ready to go. Alright, last thing we're going to look at, a CAN report versus a CANA report. Obviously a CAN report is stated conditions, what's going on inside there, what actions you're taking, and any needs you might need. A CANA report just simply adds an A onto there, and that A stands for air. So after you give your conditions, actions, and needs, then just make sure you let the IC know how much air you have left.